So this video, I'll be talking about screenwriter, author, producer, director, actor, Cameron Passerande from the YouTube channel CamPaz Films, and his analysis of the final season of Game of Thrones. First off, Cameron, like many of us, did not like the final season, and not because a certain character didn't do what he wanted to do, or a certain character that he liked or disliked lived or didn't live, simply because he felt like the essence of George's world and D&D's writing were severely lacking. Now, that's how I interpreted his analysis video, so I want you to also watch his video and tell me in the comment section down below what you think about it and how you feel about his take on the final season. But for this video, I'm going to talk about my interpretation and his analysis video. So Cameron wrote a book called The Writing Tree, a writing tool designed to help screenwriters in understanding the significance of what they are writing by investigating the physical and non-physical factors that are influencing the contents and creation of their work. By understanding what moves us to write, our experiences, and what we're currently going through, and who we are as a person, we can better understand what we're writing. And Cameron has 2 videos discussing the final season, Game of Thrones season analysis, and Game of Thrones rewrite, which should have a link popping up on the screen to his channel and those videos right now. In his first video analysis, Cameron discusses how as a writer or screenwriter, you need a core trunk, a core idea, feeling, or the essence that drives you to write. From that trunk are the lower branches, which include the structure and characters, the upper branches, which are the scenes, and the leaves are what we see, the details. Now, the roots are where you are, what you and the world is going through, and what you are experiencing currently, which influences your writing. Cameron's belief is that the writers of Game of Thrones D&D lost view of the trunk, which made it so that, yeah, we saw the same characters, we saw the same set designs, we saw the same costumes, but these weren't the characters that we knew and were built throughout the other seasons. Cameron argues that these characters lost their core and their complexity, which I absolutely agree with. We see these characters being dumbed down or the complexity taken out of them so that D&D can simply get to their destination. And we also see characters act so out of character that it's just mind-blowing.
You will rule wisely and well while she
is my queen.
And Cameron makes this statement in this analysis video that I completely agree with, that D&D probably convinced HBO and George that they understood his source material enough that they could create this amazing world without losing what made it so special. However, they definitely didn't completely obviously understand these characters or the story or understand how to get them to those certain places. The best example I have that I feel really fits in with that is if you look at Stannis. Now, I'll admit, I love Stannis, that's no secret, but I'm not really the type of person that fanboys hard over something and can't criticize it. I often criticize things I love very harshly, very, very harshly, which is just who I am. I don't understand people that just fanboy over shit and can't criticize. It's weird to me. If you love something, you should want it to be better. I don't know. But if you listen to D&D talk about Stannis in interviews and the inside the episode clips, you began to realize that they didn't actually understand Stannis at his core. They just completely misunderstood his character and made him so one-directional. And if that's how they just wanted to interpret or show Stannis in the show, that would be great. Okay, you saw how he was in the books, but you wanted to present him this way in the show. Unfortunately, they actually thought that's who Stannis was in the books, and that they were accurately representing him in the show, which was probably a very early warning sign. And I think that's a reason why many of us, including Cameron, and he talks about this in his analysis video, why it was so disappointing that we had this thoughtful author like George, and then these characters were made black and white, And that's something George is so against. Black and white is not how he sees the world, and it's not how he sees people. We all have the capability of great good and great evil, and nothing is just completely straightforward. But it really seems like D&D started to take shortcuts with dialogue and with character progression so that they could get to a certain place. And because they were rushing to those destinations, they made their characters more black and white, which completely goes against the world George created. And this just wasn't in the final season. We saw this for quite a few seasons. And it usually happened when they no longer had George's source material, his books, to go off of. A great example of this is Jon Snow in the books getting stabbed to death by members of the Night's Watch, just like in the show. But in the books, it makes more sense. It isn't simply racism towards the free folk, and good guy Jon Snow is sticking up for them. No, in the books, Jon is making decisions that a Lord Commander should not do, and he knows it. He says as much in his POV chapters. So when some of his men turn on him, yeah, it was shitty, but it was more legitimate. They saw their Lord Commander going against his vows, and Jon was in the wrong in that aspect. But in the show, Jon is just a white knight, not this complex character struggling. And it was even worse in the final season. They made him so one note that it felt like the Jon we had for all those seasons wasn't there anymore, so we could just move the plot along faster. The same thing was done with Dany. They needed her to be painted one way, the bad guy, so they went over the top with her mental breakdown, slaughter of innocents, and then the whole crazy eyes. The subtle, nuanced nature of Game of Thrones didn't seem to exist in the final season. These are characters that George so finely crafted to be gray, for us to wonder and hope they could be redeemed. Instead, we got what George hates: black and white characters. Dragon Lady bad, now must die. Which goes back into D&D wanting to get to a destination as quickly and as flashy as they can, something Cameron appears to agree with. He believes that the trunk became sullied by the roots, which were the over-the-top violence and nudity, likely added to keep the average viewer and drive up the numbers. Because even when they took away the complexity of the books and simplified it for TV and added in more nudity and violence, it still confused a lot of people. And this absolutely isn't me saying, oh, we're so great because we're like the super fans of Game of Thrones. I just feel like a lot of people have to realize that we're not the normal Game of Thrones fan, and I don't say that in a negative way whatsoever. We are not the average viewer. The average viewer for Game of Thrones doesn't pore over forums and videos and subscribe to a bunch of Game of Thrones channels. That's just not the norm. So things that make sense to us or are obvious aren't to the average viewer. And D&D really seemed to start to want to play to the average viewer that it drives up views. It drives up revenue. They have more power, more say. They have more opportunities given to them because they can have such a mass appeal. So to a certain degree, I understand that they had to simplify things or bring things to the table like lots of nudity, sex, and violence that draws in the average viewer. And that being said, even the over-the-top Game of Thrones fans like you and me, I have seen plenty of longtime subscribers of this channel disagree with what I said in an episode and just go off on me and just calling me heinous names and saying I'm never coming back, you're so fucking stupid, and then later it's confirmed I was right through an interview. And I'm not saying I'm always right, because no one's 100% right, but it's just an example that if us hardcore fans can have trouble with some of the plot and motivation, you can start to understand a little bit why D&D had to dumb some things down. And that's fine, there is nothing wrong with people that like to turn their brains off and just watch sex and violence. Good for you, I don't really care. But when I do start to care is when D&D take this beautiful, deep world with such rich history and characters and dumb it down so much because they want that mass appeal and great ratings and money. And going to what Cameron was saying about the over-the-top, almost pornographic violence in the final season of Game of Thrones, it just wasn't the final season. It was almost like D&D had to go over the top with characters to let us know they're bad or they're good. Let's take Trent, for example. We knew he was a bad person. He was a piece of shit. We knew that. But D&D had to take it a step further. Oh, well, he's a pedophile, and he likes to abuse really young girls. We didn't need that. We didn't need him to be a child rapist to understand why Arya might want to take him out. But D&D had to simplify things so much. This is bad man. Very, very bad man. You should dislike him. And I mean, Trent's death in general was just over the top with Arya killing him.
Do you know who I am? Do you know who you are? You're no one. You're nothing.
I think that was one of the only cringe-worthy violent scenes. Ooh, I can actually think of one more that it felt so over the top and unnecessary. We didn't need Arya to be that brutal, to understand her character and what she's become, and to send that message. It really started to feel like The Walking Dead, where they stopped focusing on the actual plot and good dialogue. Instead, they were trying to one-up every season with better walkers and cooler situations, and everything else suffers. But really look at the final season. They spent so much time focusing on the battles and building up to the battle that there were so many characters that didn't get the attention that they deserved. Dany and Jon being related should have been more of a fucking deal between them. They should have had more dialogue about it. That was incredibly important. Instead, it just became all about the throne and Jon saying, I don't want it. And they didn't really sit and talk about, oh, hey, here's our relation, and oh, okay, Dany, can you tell me about your family? And Dany talking about it. There was no explanation to each other of their feelings, just Jon rejecting her. If you're gonna have Jon's parentage be so centered in a story, there needs to be payoff. It just doesn't need to be brushed aside or to be used to push to a certain destination that you want to get to. And then we see that they dumbed down characters in order to put them in situations they wanted them in so they could progress the story in the direction they wanted to. Dany simply forgot about the Iron Fleet. What? And that just became compounded by, in the final season, we even see that they make lore mistakes. And we see D&D doing inside the episodes and making mistakes. And I understand mistakes happen. Everybody makes mistakes. That is completely normal. But you need checks if you are working on one of the most popular franchises and bringing them to a close. You have to check your work. You aren't some bitch just putting out videos on a free video hosting platform. D&D. I don't know if you know that. What I do find interesting is that the director for the Bells, when Dany went apeshit on King's Landing, Miguel actually disliked how much violence was in the show and entertainment in general, so he's in agreement with Cameron. Miguel thinks some of us are bloodthirsty monsters, and that's why he wanted to stay on the ground of King's Landing and make us watch the death and destruction. You may remember this quote from Miguel. The destruction of King's Landing for me has always been an audience participation event. You wanted this. You wanted this. You wanted this. Here. Is that really what you wanted? I felt like there was this thing of this bloodthirstiness that exists in the fans for revenge, for this payback that is personified by Dany. I just wanted to get to the core of what that actually means, because even though the characters don't exist in the end, what you're looking for as an audience member is death and destruction. I wanted people to know how bad death and destruction can be in the safe environment they're living in. And his mantra for the battle was, what have we become? And that there are no winners, there are only survivors. Miguel also talked about what Cameron mentioned in his analysis, the embracing of over-the-top violence. You may remember this quote from Miguel months ago. I think that I'm complicit and part of a society that embraces violence as entertainment, and it's messed up. Here I am doing the 5th, I don't even know how many, but there are a lot of battles. At one point you're like, why am I creating this for people to see? Isn't there enough bloodshed and horrible stuff going on in the world? How can I resensitize both myself and the people about watching this? Which is why he stayed on the ground with the people of King's Landing and not with Dany on her dragon. Miguel explained that in an interview as well when he said, "This idea that every single person that dies in this story, every single person that is buried by rubble, every kid, that little girl, they are people and they have mothers and fathers and lives like us. They had aspirations and dreams, and they got cut short by this event. That feels like what we were trying to do there. I meant to direct you towards caring for a character you know well. What I wanted to get to in King's Landing was the idea that every single fucking one of these characters matter. Not just the characters, but the extras, and the people you don't know, and all the people you'll never see, and never know about. They all matter. That's maybe me, or maybe that's Dan and David. I don't know, but it was something that evolved out of the need or my desire to not just add to the equation of violence in television, but rather to at least propose, think about it." Which further ties into Cameron's analysis and his belief that Sopranos kind of tipped this whole thing off. It suddenly became a competition for this just crazy level of violence, and we see that a lot in movies. The CGI battles just become to the point where your eyes glaze over. In a simple example, think of prank channels. They had to keep, it used to be simple, fun pranks, and now it's just obnoxious, over-the-top shit. You're kidnapping people and faking deaths, and it's just like, fuck. But you have to do it because you have to keep ramping up to keep people's attention, which is the problem. And I brought this up in another video. It reminds me of my disturbing Game of Thrones videos, where I talk about some really dark stuff. And I have had so many people tell me, oh, that's not disturbing. Oh, that's not dark. Oh, so brutally raping and mutilating someone and sewing animal parts onto them, that's not disturbing. And it's just because they're so desensitized. If they were to see that in real life, they'd vomit all over themselves. Fuck you. People just have such a detachment from reality and how violence is in reality and how they would actually respond to it. Now, where I do disagree with Cameron's analysis is on the nudity portion. He believes that it was too over the top with nudity. I might agree with sexual violence, but honestly, in an ideal world, nudity would just be accepted. Women's breasts out would be fine and not such a big deal. There's a reason why study after study shows that the more people are exposed to nudity and porn, the less sexually violent they are. It's almost like we have science to prove that women being able to be topless and it not a big deal would actually be a good thing and lead to less violence against them. Whoa, science! Isn't it fun? But we can't do that because there are too many stupid people. And people that just don't understand general biology or human adaptability or even what secondary sex characteristics are or things that cause arousal. It's weird how we don't educate people very well. Now, I will agree with Cameron if they were using nudity and sex to move that forward and help desensitize the general populace to nudity so it wasn't that big of a deal, I would applaud them more, but I honestly think D&D started adding in all that nudity and sex simply to get more of the average viewer and to be tantalizing and ooh, scandalous. I know there was a lot of complaint about the sexual violence in the Game of Thrones show. I don't know if I was ever really bothered by that. I'm more bothered by murder and chopping people up and stuff like that. I think maybe if they would have showed Trent raping a kid, it would have been a bit too much, and I would have been like, fuck no. I know Ramsay raping Sansa was a big deal. I think what was more disturbing about that was the amount of people that commented on my review of that episode, how Sansa willingly married Ramsay and she was his wife, so technically it wasn't rape because she understood what she was getting into. Hey, no matter your relationship with someone, if they don't want to have sex with you, that's rape. It actually made me really concerned about those people. Like, deeply concerned. And this isn't just me saying this about men to women. Women to men, too. Just because he's hard doesn't mean he wants it. he needs to consent to. So that goes both ways and is equally disturbing both ways. It is fascinating to me that when you follow the data on each season to see the nudity and rape were used to cover up for poor female character development and character development in general, and when rape and nudity were reduced, we saw how much the female characters suffered with development and a lack of complexity. And I'm not saying you can't be a big, strong, cold-hearted woman, but being a bitch is how D&D think a strong woman is supposed to act. Sansa's character just became this insufferable bitch because they thought that made her look strong. In general, though, I don't get the recent trend that in order to make a woman character look strong, we have to shit on a male character. I don't know why that's a thing, but it is so commonplace. Do you remember when sci-fi fantasy women characters used to be vamps and strong and not have to just dunk on men? I remember. It was awesome. This just in, men and women can be strong characters without having to viciously take down each other. We each have our strengths and weaknesses, and we can work together. In other words, can we stop shitting on male characters to make female characters look better? That would be really cool. Lastly, on his analysis, I 100% agree with Cameron that the performances, the music, the special effects, and everything was fantastic for the final season. It is insane to see how much love and care the entire Game of Thrones crew put into this final season to just have it messed up by terrible and weak writing. Imagine being part of a group project, and you all do your work, and it's spectacular, and it's gonna be a fucking A. But then that one kid doesn't do his work, and because he didn't, you fail the project. Or in this case, 2 kids, shittily did their work. You'd be pissed. Now, if you're interested in Cameron's Game of Thrones Season 8 rewrite video, it takes a bit of a twist and has a happier ending because, man, did they fuck up the whole Jon and Dany thing. His idea is for a My Fair Lady thing, but with a man being the one educated instead. So I really recommend you to check out Cameron's analysis and rewrite and to let me know in the comment section down below what you think, how you interpreted it, and whether you think he's correct in how he viewed the final season and what D&D did with Game of Thrones.